Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityormamritam gamaya aviravirmaedhi rudrayatte dakshinam mukham tena mam pahi nityam. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and through ourselves, O Lord, and protect us evermore from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. Om Vishnurva Tripurantako Bhavatu Va Brahma Surendrotha Bhanurva Shashalakshanota Bhagavan Buddhota Siddhota Ragadvesha Visharti Moha Rahita Sattvanukampodhyato Yasarvai Sahasamskrito Gunaganais Tasmai Namah Sarvada. The Supreme Reality and its messengers are known by various names in various traditions. But as for me, I offer my worship always to the one belonging to any tradition and going by any name, who is free from attachment and hatred, free from worldliness and delusion, who is filled with compassion towards all living beings, and is possessed of all noble virtues. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So this morning, I'll speak on my favorite topic, questions and answers, because I don't have to prepare anything. But you have to prepare something. That is, you have to prepare questions. So I'll request someone to ask for the first question. Deepak has a question. So just a moment, we'll use the mic so that it's recorded for the live streaming and the video.
Yeah. I think during our Gita classes, you talked a little bit about the difference between high moral values and also the spiritual values. So if you could elaborate on that with examples.
Okay, the difference between high moral values and spirituality, huh? Okay. So first let me say that high moral values come from spirituality. That is, they are what we consider a high moral virtue that's spontaneously manifested in the person of illumination. The person who is illumined, that is their nature. And so there's a real link between virtue and spirituality. The person who is illumined can't hurt another person. Yes, they may say something that wounds their feelings, but even that will be because they're speaking the truth. Or if it's directed towards the person because they are trying to break the illusions of the person, or the wrong thinking of the person, or wrong habits of the person. But their nature is to do good to others. Their nature is unselfish. They're truthful because they have seen the truth. And so their words reflect the truth. They're honest. They don't steal. Their hearts are pure. They have no desire. Swami Atmarupanandaji, whom I knew, a great monk of the order, disciple of Swami Brahmananda. And Swami Brahmananda blessed him that he would have the knowledge of Brahman in this very life. And so during the period when I knew him, someone asked him if he had attained to the knowledge of Brahman, as Swami Brahmananda had blessed him. And he said, due to the grace of Sri Ramakrishna, the Holy Mother, and Swami Vivekananda, and Swami Brahmananda, no desire arises in my mind. So no desire would arise in his mind. And so those things that we consider virtues, that we see manifested in a person to some extent, and we think, oh, this is a very virtuous man or woman, those are spontaneously manifested in the person of illumination. Not that that person tries to be truthful, they are truth itself. Not that that person tries to be honest. They think, well, I could get away with this, but I probably shouldn't, so let me not try to get away with it. No. There's no effort there whatsoever. They're not trying to be good. They're not trying to be virtuous. That's a spontaneous manifestation of the state that they are in. And so the things, again, that we consider high moral virtues, those are manifestations of the spiritual state, and they're directly tied to the spiritual state. And so when in modern society we try to separate out the virtues from spirituality, that doesn't work. It works for some time. That is, you find in people who are atheists and agnostics, there's some very good people who are morally very good, very strong. But I would say, and I think I'm on firm ground here, I would say that's because of old habit. It's not because there's anything that has led to that other than to training from their childhood. Because if there is no spiritual reality, if I'm just matter, and with death I just disappear, go back to the constituent parts and the illusion of being a self that disappears, why should I be good? Why should I be honest? Why should I be truthful? Why should I be unselfish and help other people? You may say that, well, as the utilitarians said back in Swamiji's time, a view that he criticized roundly, you may say, like the utilitarians, that, well, you should seek the most of the good for the most people. Why? Why? What's your answer to that? Why? Why should I seek good for the most number of people? If everything is just matter, bubbling up of matter, consciousness itself is just a bubbling of matter. There's no soul, there's no God, there's no unity here except for just an ocean of dead, insentient matter. And I come out of that and I'm going back to that when I die. Why should I be good? Why should I be unselfish? If it serves my purpose to be selfish, why should I be unselfish? If it serves my purpose to lie, why shouldn't I lie? You'll say, well, because you'll feel better about yourself if you don't lie. Why would I feel better about myself? There are people who become habitual liars, and they can't even tell the truth. Even when it serves their purpose, they can't tell the truth, and I've known such people. They can't tell the truth. So, what do you say to them? No, you'll feel better if you tell the truth? No, their experience is, I get away with it, and I'll just keep doing it. Why should you be truthful? Why should you be honest? Why should you not take advantage of other people when you can? They're going to die and return to matter. They're just a bubbling up of unconscious matter. What does it matter? Some of you have heard of the famous 20th century psychologist. He was the founder of behavioral psychology, B.F. Skinner. And he believed, he was a thoroughgoing materialist, who believed that we were just matter and that the mind is just a combination of matter. And consciousness is just a bubbling up of material activity and nothing more than that. And so late in his life, he wrote, I can't remember whether it was in his diary or in his autobiography, but it came out in his biography. He said, sometimes still I feel bad about something. But why should I do that? He was asking himself, just an honest query to himself. Why? If everything is just matter and just material things, why should I worry about things? The fact is that we do. And that shows that we instinctively believe that there's more than just matter. And so if everything is just matter, and everything disappears into unconscious dead matter, there's no continuity whatsoever. There's no earthly reason to be good, unless it serves my immediate purpose. And if it doesn't serve my immediate purpose, then forget it. Once here itself, I told long enough back, so most of you have forgotten, and several of you haven't ever heard it. So that in 1989, I was part of the Soviet festival in San Diego. I was living in San Diego. And the city of San Diego was celebrating a Soviet festival. That is, it was during the Glasnost and Perestroika and the coming together of the US and the Soviet Union under Gorbachev. And so they're promoting friendship between the two countries for the first time since the Communist Revolution. So the city of San Diego invited the best artists from Russia in all different fields, performing artists, circus artists, musicians, visual artists, dancers, etc., to come to San Diego. And I think it was for a full 2-week program. And so all over San Diego, there were these programs going. And then I was part of the concluding prayer service, which is an interreligious prayer service, where we were asked to deliver prayers or do something from our tradition as a benediction to the program. But that's just, all of that is just background. There was the Minister of Culture from the Soviet Union. That's a wonderful thing that they even had a Ministry of Culture. The U.S., we don't have any Ministry of Culture. But the Minister of Culture stayed with a friend of mine, Father Egan, a priest who was an important priest in the San Diego area, not a bishop or anything, he was just a priest, but an important priest and a very good man, a good friend of mine. So he was the host of, because the different people, officials from the Soviet Union, they were hosted with families in San Diego so that they could see American life. That was the whole idea, that it was a cultural exchange. And so Father Egan took the Minister of Culture around to show him things, sites in San Diego, and took him to grocery stores and things like that. And the Minister of Culture was amazed when he went into a grocery store. He said, "You have more varieties of dog food than we have people food." But he told Father Egan, after he'd been there for some time, a week or so with him, or maybe towards the end of his stay, after 2.5 weeks or so, he told Father Egan, and again, he was the Minister of Culture for the Soviet Union, the whole national government, and of course a member of the Communist Party. He said to Father Egan, "I will never again hire a communist, because without the idea of spirituality, there is no culture. The culture itself is tied to spirituality." And so virtue, morality is inextricably tied to spirituality. Culture itself is tied to spirituality, as the great British historian Arnold Toynbee, who is very fond, by the way, of Sri Ramakrishna. He said in his studies of history, he said that until modern times, there has been no civilization in the world that has not had a spiritual foundation, a religious foundation. That no civilization in the history of the world can we find, going back to cavemen, has there been a civilization that was not based on a religious idea. Only in modern times we've tried to get away from that and tried to form states that are separated from the idea of religion and spirituality. So even civilization, culture is founded in religion. Morality is founded in religion and spirituality. And now getting more directly to the point that Deepak was making, that the distinction between morality and spirituality. The distinction is only this, that simple morality, just being a good person, that's not enough to become spiritual. It is enough to carry one a long way. And it's difficult enough to be a good person. a good, strong, good person. And I make that distinction because it's easy to be a goody-goody person, and that's not wanted by anybody nor respected by anybody. Just being goody-goody, as some of our Indian Swamis used to say, like Swami Bhashyananda, is so good that butter won't melt on his tongue. And it means that there's no life force in him. He doesn't even have any prana. He's practically dead. And Swami Vivekananda said that you see lying, L-Y-I-N-G, not laying down, but lying masks of men who are too dead to do anything bad. And so that's not what we want. We want that goodness which is a fire, that goodness which is a dedication, which is a commitment to something higher. It's possible to be good and not to be spiritual. And that's why we see atheists and agnostics who are good people, moral people, but not spiritual. However, it's not possible to be what we can say transcendently good and not be spiritual. That's why Gandhiji, he said his whole life was founded on two virtues, and that was where all of his strength, all of his power, and what spirit, he wasn't an illumined soul, he didn't claim to be an illumined soul, but what spiritual development he had, because he did have some spiritual development. He was a very good man, and a religious and a spiritual man. What he did have, that came from his foundation in morality. And so the moral virtues will take us a long way. And in fact, if we hold on to them strongly enough, then eventually they'll take us to the point where we begin to see the truth of spirituality. And as Sri Ramakrishna told Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, whom in the gospel class we've been reading the chapter on Sri Ramakrishna going to see Vidyasagar, and then his comments afterwards also. That's why he found that Vidyasagar was a great man and a very good man and a deeply good man. And he told him that the great treasures are hidden within you, but you haven't looked at them. All you have to do is to turn your attention in a different direction, and then they will be manifested easily. That is, he had become so good, so unselfish, so generous, hearted, that all he needed was to turn his mind towards God, and easily he would attain that which we struggle so hard to attain. And so that's because moral virtues, again, are tied to spiritual virtues. But ordinary goodness, as Swami Vivekananda said, the goodness which is supported by the policeman. That is, we don't do bad things because we'll get caught. Don't do bad things because it's illegal. Don't do bad things because it'll cause trouble. That is not spirituality. That's not spirituality. That's just ordinary social morality. And that's why ordinary social morality is distinct from spirituality. It's not that the highest moral values are not intrinsically tied to spirituality. They are. And if we follow those moral values far enough, then they will eventually take us to the point where God takes over, where we begin to see the connection with God. And then they lead into the realization of God. That's why Girish Chandra Ghosh in the life of Sri Ramakrishna, the great Bengali dramatist and playwright, the Shakespeare of Bengali theater. He was a person whose life was very debauched. He used to say, though certainly this is an exaggeration, but he used to say that there is no sin which I have not committed. No, he probably didn't murder anybody. We can assume that. So there were some sins that he had not committed. But in a typical dramatic style, he would say that there's no sin which I have not committed. And he certainly had committed enough. And yet, one thing that he had was that he was truthful. He was truthful. He couldn't tell a lie. He was open about everything he did. He didn't hide anything that he did. He would even take a bottle with him to see Sri Ramakrishna. He didn't hide anything. And so when when he asked Sri Ramakrishna what he should do, and Sri Ramakrishna told him, well, think of God in the morning and the evening, he said, I can't do that. Well, think of him at least once a day, I can't do that. Well, think of him just before you go to bed, I can't do that. And so forth. Everything Sri Ramakrishna said, he couldn't do. And then Sri Ramakrishna said, well, then give me your bokulma, give me your power of attorney. And that will be enough. And Girish thought, oh, now I'm free. I just give you my power of attorney, you're responsible for everything, and now I'm free. But because he was truthful, because he was, to his very essence, he was truthful, that commitment, he had told Sri Ramakrishna that I give you my power of attorney, that eventually led him to a high spiritual state, just because he was so truthful. And so moral virtues will lead us towards the divine if we take them strongly enough. So not just I'll be moral because otherwise I'll get caught by the policeman. I'll be truthful because otherwise somebody might catch me, or I'll get in trouble or something, or eventually it'll catch up with me. No, because that's who I am. So truth, honesty, unselfishness, all of those things, when they become deep enough, then they become spiritual virtues, because that's where they come from. That's where they come from. Again, why should I be unselfish? If there is no God, if there is no soul, if there is no eternity, if I'm unconnected to the rest of humanity, why should I be unselfish? Why should I be truthful? Why should I do good to others? There's no earthly reason for that, unless there's some spiritual connection. And so there is a spiritual connection to morality, but that morality has to be of a deep and fundamental nature. And even then, eventually it has to lead us to the point where we begin to seek the spiritual roots of it. That's why, again, Sri Ramakrishna told Vidyasagar that now turn your mind within, and there you'll find all sorts of treasures that you don't know that are there. But he told him that because Sri Ramakrishna saw that he was close to being able to discover that. His goodness, his unselfishness, his moral strength had taken him to a point where it would be easy for him to turn now his mind towards God and to finish the work. In fact, as far as I know, Sri Ramakrishna never met Vidyasagar again. After that time, he went to his house. But he says, some days after coming back from Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar's house in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, he says that I would like to go back to see Vidyasagar, because I have just begun the work. That a few more times and it will be productive of great results in his life. That is, with a few more visits, then Vidyasagar could have completely turned the direction of his life towards the divine, so that his moral virtues, his unselfishness, his charity, all of that could have been fulfilled in the transcendent. Absent that, what happens is what you see happening in the life of what actually happened to Vidyasagar. He became bitter late in his life. There's a famous incident where someone came and reported that so-and-so is criticizing you in the newspapers. And Vidyasagar said, is it so? But I never did any good to him that he should harm me. Meaning that everybody that he had done good to had turned against him and tried to harm him. And so there was that bitterness. And that is natural. It's not that Vidyasagar was a bad person, that, well, why should he have thought that? He should have been a nicer person than that. Well, it's not a question of niceness. He was being realistic. That he had done so much for so many people, and then yet people turn against him. And that we see all the time. That's why people in the helping professions have such a high rate of burnout, because they go to help people and people don't appreciate it, or they take it for granted, or they expect it. And think that that person is supposed to be helping me. And so then they start treating the helping person as a servant. So that's only natural. But the way to avoid that is to see the transcendental connection. That is the connection to God. Connection to God. Otherwise, goodness itself doesn't fulfill itself. And just one more thing let me say, and then I'll see if there's another question. If you sever that connection between morality and spirituality, what you find is that morality, social morality, continues for some time, but then it begins to degenerate. And that's what happened in the Soviet Union. I don't know so much about China, but in the Soviet Union, that's what happened. That when for 70 years that spiritual connection was aggressively cut, and every effort was made to suppress religion. They couldn't suppress it completely because of people's fundamental religious nature. It's a fundamental part of humanity. But they did repress it for the majority of people. They did cut it off for church attendance and things like that was disallowed. So the moral fiber of the Russian people went down very far. Our Swami, Atmarupanandaji, who went to Moscow and loves the Russian people, and still there in Moscow. He went around 1990-91. I think it was the beginning of 1991, because I saw him when he'd come back in 1991 summer, after his initial visit there. He told me that the work ethic and the moral ethic of the people had been destroyed after 70 years of communism. And why? It's not because communism is immoral. Communism, Marxism, supports moral behavior. In fact, they're stricter about some things than democracies are. In East Germany, for instance, anybody can walk down any street at any time, man or woman, without fear of being hurt. But how did they do that? How did they do that? The punishment was so severe that nobody dared to do anything. It wasn't because they were moral, it's because they were so afraid that nobody would dare to do anything, because punishment would be swift and severe. And so if you cut off that connection between morality and spirituality, for some time there's the old momentum that goes. You learned in your childhood, your parents were good, and so you try to be like your parents and so forth. But after a while, when the idea goes deep, that there is no spirituality, there is no soul, there is no God. Everything is just matter, bubbling up of matter, and then when we die, we're gone forever. Then the connection begins to die, and the momentum begins to come to an end. And so that's why the connection to spirituality is extremely important. Now, let me see if there's another question. You had a question? You wait for the microphone. Up here in the front, around you. No, up here. No, up here. Oh. Front.
Swamiji, my question is on aparoksha anubhuti.
Yes.
Okay, in Shankara, in aparoksha anubhuti, he said dissolution of Tripurti leads to nothingness, and which eventually results in aparoksha anubhuti.
So it leads to nothingness, and nothingness leads to aparoksha anubhuti.
Yes.
That I would have to see the actual text to have some context to see what he was referring to. When the distinction between the knower, the known, and the process of knowing, when that disappears, that in all of my experience, I'm the experiencer. This is what I'm experiencing, or I'm experiencing a particular thing. And then there's the process of knowing. So there's the knower, the object known, and the process of knowing. When that triad disappears, then one has the knowledge of the highest. And so what I would think he's saying, but I would have to see the actual text to see the context and what leads up to it and what follows it in order to be able to say for sure, because I've read the Aparoksha Anubhuti several times, but I haven't read it recently, and so don't remember the whole text. what he means by there being nothingness and that leading to a parokshanubhuti. I'm not sure what the nothingness part is, except for it's the absence of a distinction between knower, known, and process of knowing. So basically, we have this triad in experience. One of the interesting things, a comparison between Chinese thought and Indian thought, is that in Chinese thought, they tended to put things in dualities, like yin and yang, opposing forces of dualities. In Indian thought, though there is the idea of the dvandvas, the dualities between like heat and cold, right and wrong, left and right, north and south, etc., they tended to go for a triad. And that actually is a more profound way of seeing things. Because even with yin and yang, you know, in the famous Chinese principle of yin and yang, you also, what you're always seeking is balance. But there's not balance is just seen as the balancing of yin and yang. It's not yin and yang. It's not seen as a thing in itself. But in Indian thought, there is the triad between the three gunas: tamas, rajas, and sattva. So tamas is inertia, rajas is activity, passion, etc. And so those two are like opposites, like yin and yang. They don't exactly fit yin and yang, but they're opposites like yin and yang. But sattva, which is equilibrium and which is balance and which is light, that's not down here with yin and yang. I mean, with tamas and rajas, just sort of the two, adding them together and you get the middle, which is sattva. No, sattva is up here. It's a higher quality. So balance is something which is above rajas and tamas. You don't get it by mixing the two together. It's not like gray, which you get by mixing white and black. And so that's just the equivalence between where the two meet together is gray. But here, no, there's not. It's a triangle. Sattva is up here. And so with the knower, the known, and the process of knowing, in all of our knowledge, there is this sense of I'm the knower, I'm the subject of experience, I know something, like I know this book. Right now, I'm not talking necessarily about the contents of the book. I just know this as a book. This is a book, and I see the book. I know the book. But there's the process of knowing. There's the process. There's I, the conscious subject. There's the object which I'm looking at, and there's a process of knowing it. I know the book. And so in Vedanta, it's said that this triad is really unreal. That this triad is an abstraction. It's a way of seeing in our present deluded state of mind that actually every act of knowledge is non-dual. There's a beautiful verse in or passage, I don't think it's a verse, I think it's prose, in Upadesha Sahasri. In Upadesha Sahasri, there's some verses and some prose sections. But there, Shankaracharya says that every act of knowledge is non-dual. Every act of knowledge is non-dual. Whenever I know anything, there's a coming together of the subject to the object in the process of knowing. But the mind abstracts these out into the three. And so we think that I'm the knower, knowing a distinct object, and that there's a process of knowing. So in the high state of knowledge, on the path of knowledge, and yes, this is according to Jnana Yoga, which is expressed in Parokshanubhuti. It's not the same, seen the same in like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, because they don't believe in non-duality. But in the Advaita Vedanta, it said that this distinction between knower, known, and process of knowing disappears because it's not really true now. That there is an identity between the knower and the object known and the knowing right now. It's just that the mind operates in a sense of duality. So let me take, just to make it clear, then I'll ask for another question. There's actor, the doer, let's say, the doer, the thing done, and the action itself. So that also is a triad where there's I am the actor, I'm making a table, and there's the process of making the table. But even there, we find eventually that also is non-dual. What do we say in the blessing? Brahmarpanam Brahmahavir Brahmagnau Brahmanahutam. Brahman is the ritual, Brahman is the offering, Brahman is the one who offers into the fire that is Brahman. Everything is Brahman. The doer is Brahman, that which is done is Brahman, the process of doing is Brahman. Brahmaiva tena ganthavyam, he alone goes to Brahman, Brahma karma samadhina, who sees Brahman in the midst of action, where the sense of doer, done, and the process of doing, that collapses into the perception of the non-dual Brahman. But now, again, we have the concept of being a doer, thing that I'm going to do, and the process of doing. Okay, follow up, and then I'll take another question. Just
can I complete the question?
Use this, yeah.
Yeah, the question, I really want to complete the question. The question is, you are very well knowledgeable about Buddhism because you are comparing Buddhism to Hinduism. When a person reaches Triputi level, the Buddhism says that state is sunyam, sunyam, sunyam. And Shankara says that is the stage aparoksha anubhuti happens. How come Buddhism missed it? Do you see the logic?
Okay, yes, I see. Why is it that Buddhism says that when you get to the highest, everything is empty? I would say, if what Sri Ramakrishna taught is true, that all religions are headed towards the same thing, and that Buddha had the experience of Brahman, but he expressed it in different words, that when the Buddhists are talking about shunyam, that they are speaking about the same thing we're speaking about, but they to speak in negative language. Because the Buddha's teaching was a reaction against the ideas that were prevalent at that time, and so he proceeded by a process of negation. In the Vedanta also there's a process of negation, neti, but the Vedanta is supported by the Shruti, by the scripture, by the Veda, where it said that I am Atma Brahma, Prajnanam Brahma, Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahman, Tattvamasi, thou art that, you are Brahman. Buddha had rejected the Vedas and everything that belonged to the Vedas, and so he didn't have that knowledge. That's why in Vedanta they say, make such a point in Advaita Vedanta, that without knowledge the highest state is not possible. There has to be knowledge which is implanted into the mind. Otherwise, how do you explain the fact that in the Yoga Darshana of Patanjali and the Sankhya Darshana of Kapila, that they attained to a state of the perfection of the mind, saw the distinction between the mind and Prakriti, nature, the mind and everything objective, and yet they didn't attain to non-dual knowledge. They remained with the idea that Prakriti is eternal, the Purusha is eternal, and there are many Purushas, they're all separate. My Purusha is separate from your Purusha, separate from your Purusha, separate from your Purusha, etc. Why didn't they attain to non-duality? Because just perfecting the mind is not enough. There then has to come knowledge. The same with Buddhism. In Buddhism, they went very far. And some of the saints of Buddhism certainly must have attained to the highest because it's the truth. And when one gets close enough, if nothing else reveals it, then the divine reveals itself in the mind to some. But in Buddhism, they never got to they call themselves Advayavadins, the non-dual followers of non-dualism. But their non-dualism doesn't mean the Vedantic non-dualism. A Buddhist will not say that they realize themselves to be one with reality itself and the non-dual reality, which is the reality of everything. There's that corny joke that's told that most of you have heard, I'm sure, about the what did the Buddhist say to the hot dog vendor? They go to buy a hot dog, and what did they say to the hot dog vendor? He said, "Make me one with everything." And that, of course, is an American expression meaning put all the sauerkraut and the ketchup and mustard and onions and chili and everything else on it. Put everything that you got, put on it. But of course, the joke is that it's the Buddhist saying, "Make me one with everything." A Buddhist will never say, "Make me one with everything." That should be why did the Vedanti, what did the Vedanti say to the hot dog salesman? Because that is Vedanta, not Buddhism. The Buddhists don't believe in oneness. And so when it comes to shunya, that was as far as they could go, to say that that which is found is devoid of all name, all description. They won't even call it reality. They won't call it self. They won't call it Brahman. They won't call it anything. And they won't call it one either. They won't call it the non-dual reality, which is the reality of everything. No. And that's because it's possible to go to the very heights of spirituality and miss the last step without the receiving of knowledge. Tattvamasi, thou art that. Without that knowledge, then it's possible to go so far and then remain there. So, okay, you had a question. Oh, first here, because I saw his hand first for long ago.
Oh, good morning, Maharaj. First of all, pardon me for my ignorance and confusion. There's this talk about consciousness and we talk about awareness, and then we have experience. Our awareness is influenced by our experience. And then in scientific terms, we talk about unconsciousness. Do you have any insight into how all these are interconnected? And we have some knowledge about, in scientific terms, what unconscious person is. So I would like to know if you have an opinion or insight into this.
Yes, I'll give what insight I do have, admitting to its limitations. Why in science do they have the idea of the unconscious? And let me start with the unconscious mind. Because generally we think that this table is unconscious, the floor is unconscious, a rock is unconscious. When you get to living things, there's the beginnings of consciousness. Even a bacteria is seeking to preserve itself. And a single cell life carries on processes and responds to the environment and everything. So some sort of awareness there. But there's material nature, which is non-living, which is completely unresponsive as far as we can ordinarily see. And that seems obvious. But then the unconscious mind, that's a bigger problem. Where did the scientists come up with the idea of the unconscious mind? Because that was Freud and Jung and early psychologists who came up with the idea of the unconscious mind in the West. In India, they had its own source of that in very ancient times. But in the West, the idea of the unconscious mind came through the process of science. Why? To explain human behavior. Because we find that people do things and they themselves don't know why I did that. I don't know. I just did it. When we analyze human behavior, we see much of it seems to be motivated by things that the person himself, herself is not aware of. And so there must be an unconscious mind which is influencing conscious behavior. Plus the fact that I have so many memories, but those memories are not present in my mind. Where are they? There must be a place where those memories, like if you mention the name of the town where I was born, then suddenly memories of that place come to mind. Well, where were they before you mentioned that? I wasn't thinking about it. And so they must have been somewhere. I wasn't conscious of it, so it had to be in some unconscious place where I was not conscious of it. So the unconscious mind is posited to explain human behavior. Freud's whole theories were based on that what motivates people to do the things they do? Why do people do things that they know they're not supposed to do? Or they don't even want to do, but still they do it. People oftentimes don't know what their motivations are. They just did something. And the more he analyzed people, the more he saw that there were all sorts of hidden forces influencing a particular individual's behavior. Hidden forces, but internal, not coming from outside to somewhere else, but internal. And so he posited the unconscious mind. The Yoga, Sankhya, and Vedanta, all of them say that the mind is unconscious by its very nature. That is, the mind is part of Prakriti. There's a distinction between Prakriti and consciousness, that is, nature and consciousness. Consciousness is never unconscious. Consciousness is self-luminous. Consciousness is luminosity itself. Consciousness is awareness, is the full light of infinite knowing. But we find that there are things which are hidden to consciousness. That's why science is always discovering things. Explorers are discovering new things. Astronauts are going to the moon so far, not beyond that, though vehicles are going elsewhere, but discovering new things. So where was it before they discovered it? We were unconscious of it. And so the Sankhya, Yoga, and Vedanta all say that nature, what is nature? Nature is everything that we experience. I'm the experiencer. I'm the light of awareness which experiences things. But everything that I experience is by nature unconscious. It seems conscious when I throw the light of consciousness on it, when I look at it. When I'm not in this room, this table is here, but I don't see it. And so the table is not within my consciousness. But then when I see it, it's an object of my experience. So with my thoughts. In the West, you have to always remember that in the West, when people talk about consciousness, they mean something very different from the Indian idea of consciousness, the Hindu idea, the Vedantic idea of consciousness, where consciousness is the light which illumines experience itself. In the West, consciousness means those processes of thinking which I'm conscious of. I'm thinking and I know that I'm thinking, and so that's consciousness. No. The Vedanta says, and Yoga, Sankhya, and Vedanta all say, that thoughts are not conscious. Some of them are illuminated by consciousness. And that's what we call conscious thinking. But consciousness is not the thinking itself. Consciousness illuminates the thinking. And so the mind is full of all of these processes that are going on, stirred up by the flow of prana, the vital force within us, which is flowing through the body and activating the mind. Prana affects the mind and it affects the body. It's sort of the mediator between the body and mind and explains why the body and mind interact. So all sorts of thought processes are going on, but most of them I'm unconscious of because the mind is unconscious by nature. There's a little bit of the mind which is illuminated by my consciousness, and that we call the conscious mind. But that's just a part of the mind, of the whole ocean of mind, most of which is unconscious. And so there are many let me start over in a different way and say that through deep spiritual practice, more and more of the mind becomes illuminated. And so what was part of the unconscious mind becomes part of the conscious mind. Because again, the conscious mind is only that part of the field of mind which is illuminated by my awareness. And so it's said that when one goes very deep into within oneself, one can find the first bubbling of a desire, the first bubbling of a thought, and you can stop it there. In our present experience, we're aware of a thought or a desire when it pops into the surface mind, the conscious mind. But through deep introspection, one can come to know the mind in its depths. And there one can see the origination of a desire. It's because of the hidden origination of a desire that Jung and Freud before him, his guru, his teacher, Freud, conceived of the idea of the unconscious mind, because the source of desire is unknown. The effects are known, but the source is unknown. But that can become conscious. And so nature itself, Prakriti itself is unconscious. Consciousness belongs to the Purusha, to the Atman, to the self. So whatever is illumined by the Purusha, that's what we are conscious of. I'm conscious of this body right now, but sometimes I'm absorbed in thinking about something, and if I had a backache which was bothering me before, I get absorbed in thinking about something and I forget all about the backache. So it has become unconscious. The situation is still there. The nerves are still irritated and so forth, but I'm not conscious of it because my focus has shifted. So that's why in Vedanta a great deal of attention is put to making the distinction between consciousness and the unconscious. To know that I am consciousness itself. Everything that I perceive is an unconscious object of that awareness. And so even my thoughts are unconscious because it's part of the mind, part of the unconscious processes of the mind. But I'm aware of the bubbling up of thought into the conscious mind because that's where I put my consciousness. That's where I put it. I walk from here to the front of the building. And if I pay attention to it, and that's an exercise, a very good exercise made in a Buddhist meditation, a walking meditation, where you pay attention to everything that you're doing, the whole motion of, you pay attention to your foot falling onto the ground and rising like that and coming again down like so. You remain aware of everything that your body is doing as you do it. But normally you walk from here to there not even thinking about what your body is doing. You're not even aware of the fact that how your foot is flexing and going down. And so that's unconscious. But you can make it conscious. And pranayama, what are we doing? Normally we're breathing without thinking about it. Luckily, otherwise we would die when we stop thinking about it. But we can think about the breath. And so in pranayama, we make it conscious and we control it. And in Buddhist vipassana meditation, they're not trying to control the breath, but they're trying to be conscious of the breath, to be aware of it. And so everything in nature is unconscious by nature, but that becomes part of our awareness that we focus the light of awareness on, either intentionally or just by the nature of the process. For instance, my body. I touch my hand, I know I've been touched. I touch my foot, I know that I've been touched, etc. But right now I'm still digesting breakfast. The breakfast that I had, that's still being processed in my body. I'm not aware of that. That's unconscious. But who is doing it? I'm doing it, but not consciously. And so in a sense, I'm not doing it. If I am consciousness, I'm not doing it. It's being done by nature. So the distinction between consciousness and everything else, which means all of this and all of this going on in the mind, that's the essential distinction made in the Vedanta on the path of knowledge. In path of devotion, you don't need to, though some do. Ramanuja taught that also, but one doesn't need to bother with all of those things. One just seeks to love God and come closer to God, and everything is explained by that. But on the path of knowledge, one seeks to make this distinction and to be very clear in the distinction between the conscious and the unconscious. And so there are some scientists now, scientists pushing forward the frontiers of, especially in theoretical physics, who say that the biggest question to science now is what is consciousness? What is consciousness? Not what is matter and how the functioning of matter, but the big mystery to science now is what is consciousness. And so that's why Swami Vivekananda, when he was here in the West, when he saw the conflict existing between religion and science in the West, he emphasized Sankhya a great deal. Even when talking about Vedanta, he would start from a standpoint of Sankhya, because Sankhya, the school of Sankhya in Hinduism, much of the teachings of Sankhya were taken over by the Vedanta. But Sankhya makes this fundamental distinction. It's the basic principle in Sankhya, the distinction between the conscious and the unconscious. But let me say one more thing about that, because we can't be left there, because Sankhya is a dualistic system. Not dualistic in the sense that God is there and I'm here, because Sankhya doesn't believe in God. It's dualistic in the sense that it believes that there are two realities, Purusha and Prakriti, nature and the soul, which is consciousness itself. These are two realities and they remain forever. The soul realizes itself as separate from Prakriti, and then it remains in its own glory, but Prakriti remains. It's just that I'm aware of myself as Purusha, and I no longer turn my attention to Prakriti. I've left that. Not because that's illusion. And Sankhya, they don't say Prakriti is illusion. It's real, ultimately real, permanently real. But it's pure unconsciousness, pure materiality, pure objectivity, pure unconscious nature. But Vedanta doesn't say that. It uses that distinction because that's very helpful for us to find out what is consciousness. But eventually Vedanta says that we find that there's nothing but consciousness. There's nothing but consciousness. Now this leads to very strange results. If you follow it, it's usually not followed and it's usually not talked about, and many who follow it and practice it don't even think about the conclusions to this. But it's because of the conclusions to this that Swami Vivekananda said, eventually we come to a point where we find that this universe is an Alice in Wonderland universe, where nothing makes sense. What makes sense is the reality itself, but the universe falls into nonsense. How? If we see that everything is consciousness and everything that we see as an object, what Sankhya says is Prakriti, and which Vedanta says is temporarily, for temporary purposes, for analysis, is Prakriti. But if everything is conscious, then there's no unconscious mind. There's no unconsciousness anywhere. Everything is consciousness itself. This table is a wave in the ocean of consciousness. This book is a wave in the ocean of consciousness. This building is a wave in the ocean of consciousness. But what about the unconscious mind? Oh, that disappears. That's why the universe disappears into chaos and meaninglessness. The unconscious mind is there in order to explain our conscious experience. If you see that there's nothing but consciousness and there's nothing that's called unconscious, then even the unconscious mind disappears. And that which explains our present experience disappears. That which explains my, there won't be time for more questions. That which explains my present experience disappears. And so everything falls into unconsciousness, but that's no reason for worry, because by the time we reach that, then we've known the secret of everything, and we've known reality itself, which is all blessedness, all bliss, all knowledge, all understanding, all not understanding in the sense of a process, but just infinite knowledge, infinite awareness. And so when this falls into meaninglessness, that's good, because we realize that which was the meaning of everything. The meaning within everything, the meaning behind everything, the purpose of everything, the purpose within everything was that. All of the little purposes we had, all of the little meanings we had are just little broken pieces, but we find the whole in the reality. And so, just to fill out the explanation a little bit more, then I'll conclude. In science, there's so many things which are posited now, which are not experienced, but which are posited in order to explain our experience. In physics also, dark matter, dark energy. By the very nature, we can't see them because they're dark. And yet science says that there's more dark matter in the universe than there is visible matter, because otherwise we can't explain things. No, there's no such thing. All of these things are used in order to explain our experience. And it's natural to do that, to extend our explanation of things, to make things, the mind is always trying to make a rational universe. And so we assume many things in order to make a rational universe. But when we no longer need that, then the whole thing falls apart. So it's then one enters into the realm of Alice in Wonderland, where anything and everything just happens just because it happens. There's no sense to any of it. So now I don't want to leave you with that, because that's an idea and a state which is extremely difficult to live with. That's why teachers like Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda, mostly, though he talked about this, mostly he spoke in terms that we can understand and that we can live according to. And so for us, the first thing, if on the path of knowledge, the first thing that we have to do is to understand the difference between consciousness and unconsciousness, so that we can find the nature of consciousness itself. And then a time will come at the very heights of spirituality where we see that everything is conscious. There's nothing but consciousness. This whole universe is appearing in the ocean of consciousness, and I am that consciousness. And when that happens, then when the rationality of the universe disappears, it will disappear in the right way. At the present time, if rationality disappears, we become irrational. We become crazy. We become insane. So that's not the goal of Vedanta, is to make you crazy. The goal of Vedanta is to make you super sane, super intelligent, dehypnotized, to know the highest truth. And so most teachers like Shankaracharya and Swamiji and Holy Mother and Sri Ramakrishna, they assume the existence of this world that we see as it is. But they lead us towards the highest truth by positing the nature of spirit, either God or self, as the reality. Because that's where we are now. If I try to deny the reality of this universe now, I can't do it. I can't do it. Because it's still there. I'm seeing it, I'm dealing with it, I can't deny it. That's why Sri Ramakrishna says, if you're pricked by a thorn, it won't do to say that there is no thorn. If you feel the pricking, a time will come where that disappears. Either the thorn itself disappears, the body disappears, pricking disappears, then you can say it. But now I have to deal with what I'm experiencing, and what I'm experiencing is a world with an unconscious mind which explains my experience, with many scientific theories which can't be, some of them can't be tested in the laboratory. They haven't found a way to test them, but they're there in order to explain visible experience. All of that is there. That's what we have to deal with. But eventually we find that no, everything is consciousness alone. Then unconsciousness disappears. There's no such thing as unconsciousness. So I'll stop here. So good. We had three good questions. So let me give a closing chant, and then I'll give announcements. Om Dyo Shanti Antariksham Shanti Prithvi Shanti Apa Shanti Oshadaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Sama Shantiredhi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace is in the heavens, peace is in the sky, peace is on earth, peace is in the waters, peace in the plants and the trees. The gods are peace. Peace is the nature of truth. All is peace. Peace alone, peace. May that peace, real peace, be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all the beings of the universe. So now for announcements. On Tuesday,